America in crisis. How high costs, government cuts, and the immigration crackdown are creating disaster. The United States is facing an unprecedented economic and social crisis. While Americans have struggled for years with high housing costs, expensive groceries, stagnant wages, and rising gas prices, the situation has now worsened dramatically. The social safety nets that once provided some relief, such as food assistance programs, federal funding for state services, and regulatory oversight, have been gutted. Now, with mass deportations and an immigration crisis unfolding alongside these economic pressures, we are witnessing a perfect storm of instability that threatens millions of lives. This is not just a period of hardship. It is an era of deliberate neglect and systemic failure that will push many families into deeper poverty while damaging the economy at large. From high costs to total economic breakdown just a few years ago, while rent, groceries, and gas prices were soaring, many struggling families could still rely on certain programs to keep their heads above water. These included 1. SNAP, food stamps, to help with groceries. 2. Federal funding for local infrastructure, education, and healthcare. 3. Oversight agencies that ensured government funds were used properly and not lost to fraud or corruption. Although wages and cost of living adjustments, COLA, were not keeping up with inflation, there was at least some level of support. However, that fragile balance has now been shattered. 1. The destruction of food assistance. Hunger on the rise with cuts to SNAP benefits and other food assistance programs. Millions of Americans, especially low-income families, children, and seniors, are facing food insecurity at alarming rates. This means 1. More families skipping meals or rationing food. 2. Increased strain on food banks and community services, many of which are running out of supplies. 3. Malnutrition rising among children, affecting their health, school performance, and long-term development. When people cannot afford to eat, the economic and social consequences are catastrophic. Hunger fuels desperation, crime, and social instability. 2. Frozen federal funds. States and cities in crisis with federal funds blocked or severely restricted, states and local governments are struggling to maintain basic services, leading to 1. Layoffs of public workers, including teachers, healthcare workers, and emergency responders. 2. Cuts to public transportation, making it harder for workers to get to jobs. 3. Failing infrastructure, with roads, bridges, and public services deteriorating faster than they can be repaired. This has a ripple effect, making everyday life more difficult and expensive for working-class and middle-class Americans. 3. The elimination of government oversight. Corruption and waste running wild. One of the most alarming changes has been the removal of federal fraud and waste inspectors, the watchdogs who prevent government funds from being misused, stolen, or funneled into corruption schemes. Without these officials, 1. Billions of taxpayer dollars will be wasted instead of going to needed programs. 2. Corporate and political fraud will skyrocket, as there is no one left to stop it. 3. Essential services will continue to crumble, while wealth concentrates further at the top. When fraud goes unchecked, it is ordinary Americans who pay the price. The deportation and immigration crisis, making everything worse while economic instability is already worsening. The aggressive mass deportation policies and anti-immigration measures are adding even more fuel to the fire. The economic consequences are severe. 4. Mass deportations are hurting the economy and driving prices even higher. Millions of undocumented immigrants are being detained, deported, or forced into hiding, and this has major consequences. 1. Labor shortages in industries that rely heavily on immigrant workers, agriculture, construction, healthcare, food services. 2. Higher costs for goods and services due to these shortages. 3. Fewer contributions to the economy, as millions of taxpayers, consumers, and workers are removed from the system. Farmers have already warned of food shortages due to labor shortages in agriculture. Without immigrant workers, entire supply chains are being disrupted, pushing food prices even higher while businesses shut down due to lack of staff. 5. Families torn apart and social chaos beyond economics. Mass deportations are tearing families apart and creating devastating humanitarian crises. 1. Children are being left behind as their parents are detained or deported. 2. Communities are destabilized, leading to a rise in homelessness and crime. 3. Hospitals, schools, and shelters are overwhelmed, struggling to handle the influx of abandoned dependents rather than improving economic conditions. These policies are making life worse for everyone, citizens and immigrants alike. 6. More deportations, fewer workers, and a declining economy. Some argue that mass deportations will free up jobs for American citizens, but this is not how the economy works. Immigrant workers take on essential roles that many citizens are unwilling or unable to do. Removing them results in 1. Businesses shutting down, especially in farming, construction, and service industries. 2. Even greater economic decline, as fewer workers mean fewer goods, higher prices, and less tax revenue. 3. More reliance on social services, as U.S. workers are forced into low-paying jobs that can't cover basic living expenses. These mass deportations, combined with cuts to food assistance and federal aid, are setting the stage for economic disaster. A nation on the brink. The need for immediate action. We are not just experiencing a difficult period. We are witnessing an unprecedented economic collapse driven by soaring costs with no relief, the destruction of social safety nets, corruption and government mismanagement, the economic and social consequences of mass deportations. These policies are not just cruel, they are self-destructive. Instead of making America stronger, they are pushing more families into poverty, making basic goods more expensive, and damaging our economy at every level. What needs to happen now to prevent total collapse? We must demand 1. The restoration of food assistance programs to prevent mass hunger. 2. The unfreezing of federal funds to support local economies and infrastructure. 3. The reinstatement of fraud and waste inspectors to stop corruption. 4. A fair and humane approach to immigration that recognizes the economic role of immigrant workers instead of destroying industries through mass deportations. 5. An emergency cost of living adjustment, COLA, to ensure wages keep up with inflation. If we do not act immediately, we are looking at a future where poverty, hunger, homelessness, and social unrest will become the norm for millions of Americans. A functioning society cannot survive when its people are abandoned by their government, left to fend for themselves while the rich profit from corruption and exploitation. We must act before it's too late.